Hi, I'm John Zombro with The Lifetime Athlete. Thanks for joining me today. I've got 50 years of experience in hunting and 40 years in human performance, and I'm coming at this as the hunter's physical therapist, or giving you a physical therapist perspective in today's video on knives for the backcountry hunter, or really for the wilderness traveler, mountain athlete, outdoor enthusiast. So I'm going to jump right into talking about the various knives and tools which I have found to work well in my applications, and some recommendations that I'll make along those lines. But I'd also like to say there is no one perfect, and you may have found some different things that work better for you. And I'd love to hear about that in the comments with any thing you'd like to share or questions that you'd like to ask. So right away, I'm going to say that a backcountry traveler, hunter or not, always needs two knives. I'm a big fan of the two knife system, or two knives at a minimum. One on the person, always on the person, and then one in your gear, such as your backpack or whatever else you're carrying your gear in. Well, if I go back far enough in time, I grew up with a knife like this, which comes in different configurations, 2 to 3 blades, usually has a bone or synthetic handle, and it was the quintessential pocket knife. Did use this for quite a long time. And then also, if let's say you were in the backpacking realm, you probably are familiar with one of these Swiss Army knives. The original ones were more red, but they also came in black, and this was a popular tool. Don't really need corkscrews and can openers anymore in the backcountry, so I'm not using these or recommending these for most people, but I do think that any backpacker or hiker or camper should still have two knives. And what I'd like to suggest is something along these lines. So this is an extremely lightweight and thin folding knife. It's actually a lock blade, which is quite nice. This is made by Buck, and it's almost unnoticeable when in the pocket, so I think that's great for even the most ultralight of hikers. And then as a secondary tool, something along the lines of perhaps a multi-tool. This one's a Leatherman Micra. It does have a couple of nice usable tools in there that will appeal to the backcountry traveler. So that I wanted to start off with those items, but getting right into talking about hunting and backcountry hunting in particular, we want to have tools that are highly functional, that are lightweight, very effective, durable, long-lasting, reliable, all of those things. And so on my person or in my pocket, I will generally carry a folder that is somewhat substantial. I have to get into this for a moment. So these two knives, this one is from Buck. This has a liner lock, and then this one is a Gerber product, also has a liner lock. Both of these are clip point blade configurations. As you can notice, there's not a lot of sweep there in the front of the blade. I like these for a pocket knife because they seem to give me just a few more applications or ease of use with things like opening packages, cutting string or cord, notching out tags, slicing cheese, apples, you name it. And I like that as a pocket knife. Now what you'll also notice is I've removed the clips from these knives. And the reason for that is I find that when I leave the clip on the knife, it's a little too bulky for me in the pocket. And I've also found that in the backcountry, I typically don't use these as I might around town or otherwise using the clip, because they have a way of working their way out of your pocket and disappearing. And I've lost several very nice knives doing that. So I always like to put the knife in the pocket, and I prefer it to be a pocket that has a zipper on my gear. This knife, however, is a great knife. This is a Benchmade. It's kind of got a modified blade style there that's sort of a crossover between a clip point and a drop point blade. And it's a really nice, I'm trying to get the thing, it's a Mel Pardue design, but super knife, really like its effectiveness. But if I'm going to carry this in my pocket, I will remove the clip. Same goes for this one, which is a Boker. It does have the clip point, but this would just be something I'd remove if I was going to use it for personal carry. I also like to have a fixed blade skinning type knife in my pack. So that's going to be my primary pack knife. And there are many that are options, and everyone has their favorite. This actually happens to be a Mora knife, and these are very inexpensive but quite serviceable. They're generally made of a somewhat softer steel, but nonetheless a great choice. And one of the things I love about this knife is the large diameter, grippy handle with the blaze orange. And two things to talk about there. First of all, skeletonized knives are popular these days, where the tang may just be exposed metal and it's skeletonized. Sometimes wrapped with paracord, sometimes not. But what I find with those types of knives, from a PT perspective, is ergonomically, it's a little too intensive on the grip, and I can end up getting hand cramps using a knife that doesn't have a substantial handle. So I do prefer that. I also prefer the synthetic handles for their lighter weight and higher amount of grip. This knife actually happens to be one of my favorite ones, and it is the Cold Steel Pendleton Light Hunter. Now, this has had quite a bit of use, and you'll also notice that it has a bit of orange tape wrapped around the handle. I tend to do that with most of my knives, at least the fixed blade knives in the field, because when you set them down, sometimes they can manage to disappear. In fact, this knife spent a year at the scene of an elk harvest. I had laid it down, couldn't find it. My partner and I looked for it, never found it. I went back a year later and did manage to find it, but this is, maybe it's a pro tip, but it's a good thing to do with your knives. Also have a couple different options here. This knife is from Buck. It's got a nice rubber handle, a bit heavy for the backcountry. I've still used it, but it's got a very thick blade and brass features on it. This one is Gerber Freeman. A chance to talk about steels now. So this has got, I'm not sure whether these are rosewood or cocobolo handles, but it's a great knife. It's got a nice feel, good blade configuration. It's, however, made of one of the harder knife steels. This is a S30V steel and tends to be a bit harder to resharpen, although it does have better edge retention. My take is that I kind of like the mid-range steels in terms of Rockwell hardness ratings and ductility, because I find they're easier to touch up in the field. A knife like this, while it is an outstanding product, if I do manage to dull it in the field, it's very hard for me to get this resharpened. In fact, this the blade steel that's on this Benchmade folder is a 154 cm steel, and it's much easier to resharpen for me than that S30V model. Also, I'm sure we've all collected numbers of these. This is a custom or handmade knife. Has a bone handle. Useful, a beautiful piece of artwork, but again, for the backcountry, when I'm trying to be light, I may not be carrying that one. So that's kind of my take on a two-knife system. We want a folder, we want it in the pocket, not too bulky, but certainly sturdy and serviceable, preferably zipped up. And then in the pack, we've got our fixed blade knife that's appropriately sheathed and is always ready to go. I'll generally run that setup for most of my backcountry hunts, and then almost always, as long as I've got enough tolerance for weight and room in my pack, I'm going to take a folding saw. So I love to have the folding saw. This one happens to be the Baco Laplander. I can't tell you how old this is or how long I've had it, but I'm going to say it's about 15 years old, and it has cut through more wood and bone than I can even care to imagine. Great tool, and relatively lightweight for its functionality. Also, I've used several others. This one happens to be from Fano Saw Works, and it's equally capable, although I do like the slightly longer blade length of the Baco, so that's generally what I'm looking at there. Generally speaking, you can take apart any animal just using a knife, and you don't necessarily need a saw, although it is handy at times. Let's say if you are taking out a rack of ribs, or you're going to actually cut bones in the field, or maybe you're not using or doing a Euro mount and you're going to do a skull cap. These are great to have in those applications. From there, as I look down at this beautiful display, everything else tends to be optional. So if I'm going to be in a camping situation where maybe it's a livestock supplied camp, so it's a bit more luxurious in terms of what I can carry, or it's a truck camp, or a trailhead or based type camp. I'll usually have a boning knife, kind of a semi-flexible boning knife. This one's from Buck, or a fillet knife of some sort. This one's from Gerber, and it just allows me to do a bit better job with deboning meat, as well as if we're doing in the field processing. There have been a few times when it's been really cold where we've actually done some cutting and wrapping in the field of meat, and these are really essential, or at least valuable in those applications. Now, keeping with the two-knife system, if I happen to be in a situation where, let's say, we are with livestock, particularly horses and mules, one of the things that everyone who does that knows is you need access to a knife very quickly, and things get western or go south, and you need to cut lead ropes or straps or rigging pretty rapidly. So a lot of horse packers will actually use a fixed blade knife that's on a kind of a horizontal mounted sheath, and that's popular among many guides and outfitters. But I like this. This happens to be a Buck as well, but it's a folder. It doesn't take up much space, so when you're riding, it's not gouging anything. But then you have quick access to it, and it does have the thumb stud, so you can get it deployed rapidly, and very good. And then as a secondary, when in those situations where, let's say, we've just got more gadgetry, we've got livestock, or we've got more camp items, I probably will use a full-on multi-tool. This is a classic Leatherman. It's the Fuse model. I've had this for a very long time. But again, highly serviceable, durable, reliable, definitely what you want in the field. Then we start getting into some really optional items, and I would not carry a saw like this in the backcountry, or at least I don't do that anymore. This happens to be a Wyoming saw, and it's one of the larger versions. I used to pack the smaller one. It comes apart, and it's a small package essentially, but it's still more size and weight than these are. Where this comes in handy, though, is if we are doing a base camp, and again, we're going to do some meat processing. This is extremely efficient bone saw to use, super high quality blade. So not going to carry this in the backcountry, but it has seen some use, and perhaps will again. Also, if I'm backpacking, I'm probably not going to carry one of these. This is a beautiful little hatchet or hand axe, the A.G. Russell, so I can get this open. And where this comes in handy is basically if something else is carrying it. If a vehicle is carrying it or an animal is carrying it, then I like to have it around. It's great to use as a hammer for tent stakes, and then also there's some applications for cutting firewood or shaping points where it's quite useful. You can also use a hatchet or an axe for field dressing. I'm not highly in favor of doing that, but I have used it in certain applications, and it can serve a purpose. So again, there's a thought. Now, as we get a little further into these specialized tools, I'm going to say that if I know I'm going to be in an application where I'm going to be doing some caping, and I want to be very careful with how I'm doing precision work, I'll bring a caping knife, and this one's from Knives of Alaska. I've got several, but this one, I like the ergonomics of it as far as how it handles. Again, not carrying this all the time, and for most basic work, a knife like this, or even one of these would get the job done. But again, a caping knife is an option if I'm feeling inclined to carry like an extra knife, or again have something else carried for me. This is an interesting addition to my kit over really only the last several years, and it's simply a clamp. It's a spring clamp, and it has textured jaws. Where this comes in handy is if you're doing a lot of work on game, or at least even if you're by yourself and you're just skinning an elk, sometimes the pincer grasp force, and I have a little bit of arthritis in this thumb and wrist, this can be nice. So again, I'm not going to always carry this if weight is a big issue, but it is fairly light and it allows me to clasp that hide, and it's got enough holding power that it's very easy for me to skin versus using what is now an aging hand. Here's a tool, again, from times gone by. This is the Wyoming knife, and it's actually a kind of a precursor to the scalpel type of knives that are available. And I should be very careful because these things are razor sharp. So I don't use this anymore. I think I tried it, used it a time or two, and it's very sharp and can be used by anyone with a little care, just not for me. Also, things that I don't carry really often at all are these replaceable blade knives, scalpel style blades. There's numbers of sizes, numbers of brands. This one happens to be a Havalon. It's actually one of their larger fillet type models. But for me, and this is just for me, I find that working with the blades usually does require one of these to be safe in working with the blade. Again, that's going to vary from brand to brand. And then you have the blade disposal issue. That's an issue for me. The other thing is these knives, while super sharp, they are not the most durable. They can be a little fragile. They can break. Now, I don't advocate using a knife in a violent manner. For the most part, I think we should be more precise with our knife usage. But just for me, I don't really care for this. And I think it comes down to, I know a lot of people who swear by these because they are the sharpest thing available. No matter how good you are, how good you say you are at sharpening a knife, you're never going to get this knife quite as sharp as that one's going to be. Where that comes in my mind, though, is a lot of the people that have adopted these maybe, and I'm saying this respectfully, maybe haven't mastered the art of blade sharpening. And if they can, or if they could have gotten this knife as sharp as it's capable of being, they might not want that one. Again, I don't do it, not saying that many people don't. Now, this it's a Sagan saw, and it's kind of designed so you can hold it like this, and then you can saw through a pelvis or a rib cage. Kind of effective if you're opening up an animal, and particularly if you're going to say a lot of times in a deer hunting situation, you might be not in the backcountry and you're going to take this deer, or maybe it's an antelope, and you're going to open it up and hang it. They're good for this. I don't use these in the backcountry, but you can see this one has had some use for certain. Another thing I don't care for is once a knife gets to be about this size, a non-locking option is just not desirable in my opinion. I think there's just too many chances that the blade could fold back on the user, and so don't use these any longer. Now this is a great knife actually. It's a Kershaw, and I like the blade design. I like almost everything about it except the camo paint job, and it's kind of marketing. I don't like camouflage on boots, and I don't like it on knives. And when I was getting ready to do this, I was looking for this knife, and I couldn't find it because it was camouflage, and it was almost right in front of me, but I didn't see it. And interestingly enough, there's just no benefit to having a camo knife. Just a couple more thoughts. This is a beautiful knife. This goes back to my youth, and it is a Buck 110 folder, the classic hunter's knife, you generally use with a sheath. I love this knife. It's a little heavy for backcountry use for me. It's got quite a nice heft to it, but I'm going to save that for times when I'm not too concerned about weight. So all of this gets into field sharpening, or how you maintain an edge in the field. And certainly over the years, I've used these steels that do a fairly good job. You have several kinds. This one obviously goes inside of itself, is half the size, fits in a little leather pouch. This one almost looks like a pin, and you simply pull this out, tighten it back up. They work. They're good. There's a tiny bit more weight to these than some other models that I'm going to talk about. But one thing, I think here's a chance for another pro tip. When in the field, it's just such a smart idea to never cut towards yourself. And so when you're sharpening with a steel, I would suggest this, as opposed to the kind of chef's knife or kitchen technique, where oftentimes you watch cooking shows and you see even the participants in the cooking show cutting themselves doing it that way. So let's keep the knives always going away from the shelf, especially in the backcountry where we want to avoid having a major problem. Now, all that being said, for quite a while now, I've just carried these, the carbide, tungsten carbide V-notch, and they work great. This one is super light, but if I'm really concerned about space and weight, I can go down to this size. This is a Smith's product. This one's the AccuSharp. These things work great. Where they need to be understood is they're to be used lightly, so that we basically, if the edge folds over on the knife, we're just kind of straightening it back up. We're knocking off some burrs. And if we do that, we're good. If we try to recontour and use a lot of force on that blade, we may actually change the edge angle and end up dulling the knife inadvertently. So yeah, just when you have these in the field, use them somewhat frequently, but use them lightly, and that gives you your best result. Now, the final thing that I wanted to talk about today is home sharpening, and that's how a lot of these knives can reach very high levels of sharpness, shaving sharpness, razor sharpness almost. This has been a game changer for me. This is the Work Sharp knife and tool sharpener. Really good for quickly reshaping or tuning an edge, but I also have always been a fan of the stone, and I've got multiples of these in different grits. But it took me a few decades, to be honest, but once you get to the point where you can really get a good edge on a knife using a stone, it's a satisfying experience, to say the least. And then sometimes for finishing up, I'll use a leather strop or a different steel, but I'm also very fond of these ceramic rods, which are quite useful. So that kind of wraps up my thoughts on knives for the backcountry hunter, knives for the backcountry traveler. And take-home message: 2 knives, one on your person, one in your pack, and then sometimes you have an additional knife or tool, depending on what your application is. So if you found this useful, by all means, drop a comment or a question. Would love to have that. And I've got some more videos coming out for backcountry performance and backcountry hunting. Thanks again for being with me. This is Coach JZ signing off.